Good evening. Welcome to the George Eastman Museum. My name is Jamie Allen. I'm the Stephen B. and Janice G. Ashley Curator in the Department of Photography, and I'm so pleased to have you joining us this evening for a conversation between Gillian Laub and Jeffrey McCune. Jeffrey is from the University of Rochester's Frederick Douglass Institute, and Gillian Laub is the photographer who made the work that is in our Southern Rites exhibition. Tonight, Gillian's going to be giving a short presentation on her work, after which she and Jeffrey will have a conversation surrounding Laub's work on Southern Rites and the regional research that was conducted by the Frederick Douglass Institute in association with the museum's display of the exhibition. It's actually something that we made specifically for this show. Jeffrey McCune is the Frederick Douglass Professor and Chair of Faculty Programs. You have a very long title, Jeffrey. And Departmental Initiatives at the Frederick Douglass Institute and Department of Black Studies. In 2021, he assumed the role as Director of Frederick Douglass Institute of African and African American Studies at the University of Rochester. McCune holds a PhD in Performance Studies from Northwestern University. For Southern Rites, for this project, he served as the project lead for the regional research that resulted in that Western New York-focused timeline that's presented in the exhibition. McCune is the author of award-winning books, including Sexual Discretion, Black Masculinity and the Politics of Passing. He's the co-editor of the book Black Sexual Economies, Race and Sex in the Culture of Capital. And he's presently completing 2 book projects, because one isn't enough at the same time. Disobedient Reading, an experiment in seeing black, and On Kanye, which explores the, I'm going to quote it, wildness of Kanye West. In addition to serving on the editorial board of numerous journals, he's the co-editor of the University of California Press's New Sexual Worlds book series. In association with his work on the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality, McCune has been featured on Left of Black, SiriusXM's Joe Madison Show, HuffPost Live, NPR, Pitchfork, and my personal favorite, as a guest expert on Bill Nye Saves the World. So Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now I'll give a brief introduction to Gillian Laub. Gillian is a photographer and filmmaker based in in New York, which is in the United States. She graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a degree in comparative literature before studying photography at the International Center for Photography, better known often as ICP in New York. And that's really where her love of visual storytelling and family narratives began. As a freelance and editorial photographer, Laub contributes to many publications, including Time, these are just a short list, Time, Glamour, the New York Times Magazine, Interview Magazine, and Vanity Fair. With her emphasis on portraiture, she's photographed a wide variety of celebrities, and I had a really hard time narrowing this list down, including the Obamas and the Trumps, and Stacey Abrams, Celine Dion, Beyonce, Taylor Swift, and Mary J. Blige, Robert Duvall, John Waters, Laverne Cox, Megan Rapinoe, LeBron James, Christy Teigen, and Annie Leibovitz, which I look forward to talking about, because when you're photographing the world's predominant portrait photographer, I want to know what that's like. In the early 2000s, Laub made work in response to the media coverage during the Second Intifada in the Middle East. This work is comprised of portraits and testimonies from Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, Lebanese, and Palestinians who were all affected by that conflict. And her first monograph that resulted, called Testimony, was published by Aperture in 2007. And I'll just note with the events that have taken place this week, that Laub has felt the need to kind of re-pick up that story and start to re-explore it. Laub's most recent monograph is Family Matters. This body of work spans over 20 years and explores the society's biggest questions are revealed in our most intimate relationships. She accomplishes this by photographing her own family and provides an example of the ways that Donald Trump's knack for sowing discord and division has impacted communities, individuals, and households across our country. The work that brings us here today, however, is called Southern Rites. For this body of work, Laub spent over 2 decades working in Georgia exploring issues of lingering racism in the American South. The story begins with one student speaking out by sending a letter to Spin magazine. In turn, Laub was sent on assignment, but the relationships that she made with the individuals that she had met there kept her returning to that community. As part of the project, Laub directed and produced her first documentary film, also called Southern Rites, which premiered on HBO and is currently on view at the museum's multipurpose hall through November 5th. And if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to come and see it, and you might want to bring a friend and allow some space afterwards for conversation. The project also resulted in a book and a traveling exhibition with that same title, and that is what is in our galleries now. Laub's work on Southern Rites shows that photography can make an impact on communities. What started out as a story of segregated proms turned into a portrait of a community. And while the story is that of Montgomery County, Georgia, this small town landscape populated with fields of Vidalia onions, the overarching story that Laub found is that of the United States and our urgent need to confront the realities of racism, the legacy of slavery, and the emotional impacts that these histories have had on youth in our country. Gillian, thank you for joining us tonight. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. Thank you, George Eastman Museum. It's been really just such a pleasure this whole time working with you and Jeffrey, getting to know you and collaborating. And I thought it was before our conversation, I want to get to our conversation, but before our conversation, I don't want to assume that you all know this work, so I wanted to kind of take us through how I got to be in this town in Georgia and why. And so I'm going to start with the first slide. This is 2002, and this is Julie and Bubba. Julie's sister wrote a letter to Spin magazine. I was young, 21 years ago. Her sister wrote a letter to Spin magazine, please come help, please tell this story. I can't take my boyfriend to the prom, he's black and I'm white. So the prom had since passed, but the next segregated event in the community was homecoming. So this is homecoming weekend in Mount Vernon, Georgia, the first time that I went there. So you can go to the next slide. This is the homecoming event. So this is after the this was after the football game, right after. And everyone is, there's a white and a black representative from the freshman class, the sophomore, junior, and senior class. And, it felt very, it felt like not unlike the town that I grew up in, where football was such a big deal, and there was the parades and the game and the homecoming dance. But here I saw a ballot that had a separate column for white queen and black queen. So I don't think that this is a great photograph, but to me it's an important photograph for what it represents. Next slide, please. And this is, I think, really important, and there's a lot of ephemera in the exhibition that I like to include, because this is to just give you context. This wasn't something that they were hiding. This is something that they were celebrating. This is their yearbook, and you can see that all of the queens are crowned by the previous white queen and black queen from the year before. And again, this is a celebration, which to me, I thought that this was something that I read in my history book, not something that was going on still in 2002. You can go to the next slide. And I realized as I went through, I learned so much about the community by their yearbooks. And one teacher explained to me, who was the first crossover teacher, that at first they, when they integrated the schools, they actually had the white and black queen. It was a way for them to have equality. So they always knew that there would be a white queen and a black queen represented. So it was just interesting to me how something that seemed, oppressive really began with good intentions. So I found that fascinating, so that's why I wanted to include some of these old yearbooks. Can you go to the next slide, please? So when I talk to students, I always stress this, that it just takes one student's voice to really make a change. And this is Anna, who's Julie's sister, and she kept writing letters. And this was actually a history paper that she wrote. She got a 76 on it. And she wrote it crying out and really a plea, like, why are there still segregated proms? And I am not going to stop writing letters until this changes. And you see the comments here. This is the teacher defending and explaining to her why there's still segregated proms. And the last line, she's saying, hopefully, eventually it will become a reality. Next slide, please. So, as Jamie said, I did a project in the Middle East in 2002. So I had started on that right before I got the call to go down to Georgia for the homecoming. And I spent the next 5 years in the Middle East working on this project, and I was still haunted by this small community in Georgia. And I knew that when I came back from the Middle East, I had to return to this town. So in 2008, Obama's our president. I wasn't in touch with anyone in the town except Julie and Anna, and they had since moved away. And so I called up the school and I said, you know, I'm just curious, when is your prom? Because it was springtime, and I thought that was a good way to revisit the town, the prom. And not sure if it was integrated or segregated still. And the woman at the school, 2008, says, oh, which one? Oh, okay. The white folks' prom is this weekend. The black folks' prom is in 2 weeks. So I called up the New York Times Magazine immediately, and I said, they're having a white prom this weekend. I have to go down. So I immediately got a plane ticket and went down. I usually, have time to do some research and talk to people before, but I didn't have the luxury of that time because the prom was the next day. So I stood outside of the school and I met Harley, and she was the prom coach, the prom chair of the white prom. Anyway, she told me I could follow her. I soon got recognized from people from 2002. My tires got slashed, I got threatened and got kicked out of town. So this is the one picture I made in 2008. You can go to the next slide, please. At the same time, I met Kiki, who was going to the black folks prom, and she asked me if I would please, she was like, please come back and photograph me at my prom. So I was welcomed back to the prom and had full access to the black prom in 2008. So this is Kiki and her best friend Shaniqua. And next slide, please. I saw a couple of mixed couples at the black prom, and I was curious about that. And they said, oh yeah, there's always mixed couples, but Skyla was invited to the black prom, but he was not allowed to go to her prom, which was the white prom 2 weeks before. So going to the next slide, this is prom queen of 2008. And again, I just want to say, text is so important to this project, and every single person that I photograph, I get extensive interviews. So this is Lacey, prom queen of 2008, and I've interviewed her several years. So in the exhibition that's here, it's really important that her voice is represented in 2016, and soon I'm going to do a next interview with her. So everyone I photograph, I keep revisiting to see how their life unfolds. Can you go to the next one? She's a lawyer in Atlanta now. So this is Shelby, and she is a girl who I saw driving down. I was driving down the street. This car caught my eye, and so did the sign, and I asked to take her portrait. She has interesting words that you can read in the exhibition. The next slide, please. So Harley, I went down in 2009, and the proms were still segregated, but I spent that year talking to different families and saying, look, this is an important story. Please help me understand how this is still happening. So a lot of my work is not photographing. It's really having conversations And that's such an important part of the photographic process for me, are conversations before, during, and after. So she said, okay, I'll talk to you. And so you'll see it's very important. I interviewed her parents. I wanted all points of view to be represented. So this is Harley before the white prom. Go to the next slide, please. So although I got voted to be allowed in the white prom, again, I got kicked out. So I made a little studio across the street on public property, and anyone who wanted to come and be photographed and interviewed could come across the street where I wouldn't be arrested. So you could see the structure there across the street is where the Vidalia Community Center, where the white prom was the first night. And this is a graduating senior who came. The next slide, please. And so what was unbelievable, this is Angel, who actually is narrating we hear her voice as part of this exhibition. She's graduating with all the students that are at the prom the night before. And I went with her to the prom the night before and saw the door close in her face when it was time for the kids who were not white and all the parents to leave. And that was when it's like every time I was there, my heart broke a little more. And that's when I realized, like, the proms, I was photographing the proms, but there was a much larger story here that the proms represented. So this is 2009, Angel. The next slide is the prom. And again, that's Skyla, who, same situation. She had her boyfriend Barry. She went to the prom the night before with her boyfriend Barry. He couldn't come, but then she was welcome to come to prom the next night. And the next slide is prom queen and king, and this is Naisha and Kyrie. Again, I'm rushing through this, but what they say is so important to me. It feels like when I'm rushing through, it feels like I'm giving you only like a piece of the story, because their words are what's really moving and important to me. If you can go to the next slide. And this is Felicia, and I just love this picture. And I just remember this is one of the last pictures I took outside of the prom in 2009. She goes, maybe next year it'll be different. So there's something just so poignant about that. And then I realized, okay, so the story got published in the New York Times Magazine. There was complete outrage, thank God. And they were forced to integrate their prom. I also realized that photographs were not really telling the whole story. And even though that's the medium that I am passionate about, and I really believe that a photograph can tell volumes, I realized that I wanted to start filming. So I'm just going to show you a clip so you can hear people's own voices. It's here, yes.
I got in a lot of trouble with some of the students for trying to integrate it. They told me, what are you doing? It's not the parents, it is us. We don't want it together, and you need to stop trying to do this. I got cussed out. I talked to my boyfriend and I said, let's just go to both. But when I went to buy the tickets to the white prom, I was not allowed. I was told that if my date was going to be black, he wouldn't be let in. So we just went to the black prom.
I feel like the rest of the world will look at this like, what in the hell? They go to school together, they play basketball together, they cheerlead together, they're best friends. You know, it's happening everywhere. Why can't it happen in a small town like this?
This community and this school system is fine like it is. We don't want to change it. We want to live the way our grandparents lived and the way our great-grandparents lived. Why change something that has worked? Just leave it alone.
And then even with the little kids in elementary school, they pick a black elementary girl and a white elementary girl. They even make the little kids be segregated. It's so sad. I didn't even notice it. The little kids don't even know, but they're making them, learn that you are black, you are white. It's sad. I didn't even notice that.
Now?
Yeah. Recognize it to now that teaching kids segregated to be black, be white, and be your color, act your color, your place.
My grandma told me red birds and blue birds don't nest together. You come out with a red head and a blue ass, I just don't feel like it's right. That's what my grandma told me, and I believe she was right.
Okay, and then the next slide is just I came back for the 2010 prom. Again, I was voted, the whole community voted I could come, and then I was kicked out and escorted off by the police. But this is the one picture that I took that I was able to take from the integrated prom in 2010. Let's go to the next slide.
No, ma'am, do not put that in my face. And the problem is you are not supposed to be on school property unless you are signed in.
Hey,
oh, okay.
what newspaper are you with?
What?
What newspaper are you with?
This is our property.
No, you got problems. You got problems, honey.
So as much as I was threatened and chased out of town, I realized like it gave me more like fire in my belly that this story needs to be told even more. And if they have so much to hide, it just gave me I just wanted to understand what was underneath it. So I just started filming and photographing all through town. So this is where the project widens, and everyone goes to church on Sunday. So I spent a lot of time going to church in different churches on Sunday. Next slide. I thought that there was a protest in town, but actually there wasn't. I pulled over and asked these guys what they were doing. They were walking up and down, and the title of this is Public Shaming. And actually, they decided they would rather be publicly shamed than serve time, but the disorderly conduct I discovered was that he was urinating outside of a club after it was closed. So he was arrested and public shamed for not being able to use the bathroom because the club closed. So he was urinating outside. That was his offense. Go to the next slide, please. And again, we come back to prom, and I just wanted to, 2011 is really when this project changed because, well, a couple of things. I finally, got to go to the prom, and I was welcomed in 2011. And this is Amber and Reggie, who were, the prom king. They were organizing the prom, and they said that they would protect me, and I wouldn't be kicked out this time. So if we go to the next slide. And this became the cover of the book because I really feel like the tension that's in this picture, it's like this is prom prince and princess. And really, again, it's the words, his words, and what his and her words say that really kind of give the context to this photograph. Next one, please. And this photograph is one of my favorites because it's like, this is what they were trying to stop. And it's just teenagers having fun and filled with joy. And then the next slide is Naisha. And again, I told you that I keep returning and re-photographing people and re-interviewing them to see how their lives are unfolding. And the one thing that she said right after I took this photograph, because she was, took pride in the fact that she helped make the change in the town, and she said, yeah, here we take one step back and one step forward and 2 steps back. So in 2011, if you go to the next slide, her best friend, this is Justin Patterson, and her best friend, who was also Kiki, who you saw earlier in 2008, Kiki's boyfriend in high school. It's like one big family, one big dysfunctional family. Everyone seems to be related and has known each other since they were babies. But so this is Kiki and Justin at homecoming and prom. And Kiki calls me while I was photographing, filming one time in January, and she said, "Justin's dead. Justin's dead." And Justin Patterson was he was shot and killed by an older white man in the town. So that's when it went from proms to the proms leading to, now we're talking about life and death, right? So it was really important for me to spend time with the Patterson family because they didn't know if they were going to get justice. And everything that I was kind of trying to get to the underbelly of was played out in Justin Patterson's what happened with his murder. If you go to the next slide, this is Siobhan, his brother, who I'd photographed for a few of his proms, and I got to know his mom. His mom was actually very proactive in helping me get access to the proms, and she was fighting for me. And then the next time I'm seeing her, it's because of the death of her son. So this is Siobhan holding the picture of him and Justin. And it was so crazy because I'm here with him. Literally, the timing was I'm photographing him at his prom, and then 3 days later, we're in the courtroom his family's fighting for justice. If you go to the next slide. And this was the man that killed Justin. And I thought it was, Jeffrey and I are going to talk about why this was included in the project, in the film, and the exhibition. And this is with his stepdaughter. If we go to the next one, this was Justin's daughter. They all wore this T-shirt, and they had fans, and everyone was so powerful. The whole family wore this to the courthouse. And the next slide, Mia. This is Mia, like last March. So, and I'm going to be going to her prom this year. So it's almost like I'm following these families as they grow up. I'm going to be photographing third generations now. So yeah, I don't know. To me, it's an ongoing project, and it's really looking at this community and America, our country. And it's an honor that I get to do this with you, because it's like we come to Rochester, and I get to know from you how do you connect with this? How does your community connect with this work? And so that's, I guess, what we can talk about now. So thank you. I just wanted to give you a little background.
Well, there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to give us 20 minutes, even though I know it says 15. So, there was a lot here, and I just first want to say how beautiful it is to see such diverse images of youth, different bodies, different figures, different colors, different textures, different hairstyles, different ways of expressing themselves. I mean, I walked into the exhibition really thinking about how beautiful it was to see these young people being able to express themselves in different ways on their own terms. And then the quote that you just said a few minutes ago that actually almost brought me to tears was, "This is what they were trying to stop." Like, this is what they were trying to stop. And that quote is so reminiscent of so many things, particularly in Black life, where we come to these moments of after death, right? And we realize, this is what they were trying to stop, right? And for Black folks, I always say, and then I'm gonna ask you a question, but I always say the interesting thing is that in our communities, we talk about this all the time, that, my mother says this all the time. Like when in 91, I was in 8th grade, and the teacher said to me, "You'll be lucky if you're alive at 21. And my mother, every time she comes somewhere, she says, "This is what they were trying to stop." That, when you said that to me today, I was just like, oh my God, I have to say something about that. And so part of what I really am impressed by your work is that you literally use photography to stop them stopping this. So can you talk to us a little bit about the politics of that? Like how hard it was for you to actually go into these spaces and capture these images knowing that they didn't want you there?
Well, I like a challenge. It was challenging. I think that I don't think now, and I have to be honest, as a mother right now, I don't think I could do it. I don't think I could do it because I felt more in danger. It's crazy. There were times I felt more in danger there than I did in the Middle East. So it was strange. At first, I felt I was safe because the white community thought I was like, oh, she's one of us. So being white actually helped me because the white community trusted me. And then when I was considered a traitor, then it became dangerous.
So let's talk about, I'm going backwards. So like we were gonna end there, but now I think this is a good place to go, and that is to think about the danger. So I think one of the things that we can take for granted is that we live in a country that sees prom as this beautiful rites of passage that everyone should have. It's the first time that some folks get to express their desire for those they love, or those they want to hang out with, or those they desire, or those they find to be friends, all those things. Some folks get that opportunity. We know some folks still cannot, right? So I wonder about the significance of what segregation does in the community as you talk about Justin Patterson's killing. Because the young woman went to prom with Justin Patterson, and that was probably one of the most beautiful moments of their life. But you also have to know that not having Justin Patterson was probably one of the worst moments of her life. And so I'm wondering about what you thought about incorporating the story of Justin Patterson. This is different than the question I was going to ask originally. The story of Justin Patterson in this exhibition.
Well, the thing is, actually, when Justin Patterson's story happened, I thought, oh my goodness, this is a story about life and death. The prom seemed insignificant to this, and even, in the film. So it was actually so important to figure out how to weave it in and to keep it, because this is the context in which a murder like this would happen. So the proms were leading. It's almost like they were forecasting what could happen.
Yeah, because if we don't have intimacy, right? Like if me and you didn't have intimacy, if me and you don't have intimacy, we don't get to know each other, right? And so segregation is an opportunity to break up the potential intimate, and I ain't just talking about sexual intimacy or romantic intimacy. I'm talking about getting to know each other on a greater level.
To me, what was interesting is I thought that the parents were under this impression that having these segregated proms, it would keep them interracial dating and interracial sex. And so it's ridiculous. But that is what I think the intent was. It came down to that. When I really broke it down, I'm like, oh, so that's it. It created sneaking around. So everyone would be sneaking around, and ultimately, his death was, because they were doing what teenagers do, which is, sneak around.
But what I'm saying is, if there had been an intimate relationship, right, in the sense of community understanding that there are these moments, right, in which young people get together, they have friendships across races, right? Mm-hmm. When you've actually had a conversation with, I can't tell you how many people, I know that a lot of people come to these events to have experiences with black people, right? I know that. It happens all the time, everywhere I'm at, right? And I talk to them and I say, have you ever had a conversation with a black person about anti-blackness? And they'll tell me, they'll say, not directly, because I don't know what to, I don't, and I'm like, don't you have friends that are black?
So here's what I will say about this town. That's what was so fascinating about this town. It was the most integrated town I had ever really experienced. I experienced more segregation sometimes in New York City than I did in this town. These are kids, and that's what was so, there was such dissonance there because these are kids that were best friends. We're talking about a small community. When I had the picture of the graduating class. Again, not a good picture, but an important picture for this story because we're talking about a really small group of kids that they were separating, but kids that knew each other intimately from when they were babies. So
is the parents the problem? That's what I'm trying to see.
Yeah.
Are you saying that the adults are the problem?
Yes.
And so that's why I think Norm is a good emblem of...
Norman is the man who killed Justin Peterson.
Right, the man who killed Justin Peterson. I think that's why the representation of him is important, right? Because he represents a kind of old age of kind of like always thinking of black people as up to no good, right?
Threat.
As a threat, as a possible criminal, right? And so instead of just saying, this young man might really like my child, or handling it in a way that, even if you don't handle it in that way, that his life was so important that it wasn't, get out my house. Like, I can imagine if my child is somewhere with another person, right? Get out my house. I can't imagine taking the life of this young, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, 18, he was 18, right? Yeah. So I just think that's part of what I'm getting at, is that it's so rich to me. So this is a compliment to like what I discovered this time around. Because the question I was going to ask before, I'm not even asking that anymore, because what I'm more interested in is how this becomes a great story to tell. So the other question I wanted to ask you that I think is really, really interesting about the context is, could you talk to us a little bit more about the parents? Now, it's so, I know you had some interactions with some black parents, little or less interaction with white parents.
Yeah, so some of the white parents talked to me, but they knew after the New York Times came out that it was not, their words could have consequences. So I wasn't exactly welcomed in their homes. The black parents, a lot of them, and I don't mean to generalize, but it really is my experience with everyone, was like, oh my goodness, finally someone who cares that's not from our town. So it was almost a way that their voices were getting out into the world and other people cared, because they're so used to people not caring about just like the status quo of what they come up against every day. And I was really careful though, because some people did not want to be, I would talk to them behind closed doors, but if I saw them in town, they would pretend that they didn't know me, because really their livelihoods really rested on whether they kept their mouths shut. And that was really, so I was very sensitive to that. And Kiki's father, Calvin, when he was running for sheriff, he didn't want to be associated with me because he really did, he had the white vote. But if he was seen talking to me in town, then he could really lose that white vote. I didn't want to put anyone in jeopardy. So I was very sensitive to what, I got to go home, but these were lives that I didn't want to affect their lives in a negative way, or in any possible way. So
absolutely. So I want to, in the last 2 minutes that is ours.
Wait, did it go by that fast?
I know, it's crazy.
Goodness.
But I do want to talk a little bit about segregation in the context of Rochester.
Yeah.
I think that it's really easy. We got young people in the building today, so I want to say hello to all the wonderful high school folks in the building. I hope that you really liked the exhibition, and particularly the section on Rochester. Did y'all see that? Great. And also the audience too. Y'all are special too, but the young folks down here are really special.
I'm curious. Did your students come, and how did they? Do you feel like this is a representation also of, like, how did your students and people from Rochester connect to the exhibition?
Yeah, so there's a couple different responses, right? And so first off, I want to say that most folks really love the layering. Like, they were like, I would say not love, appreciated the layering. And when I say the layering, what I'm talking about is, yes, we have the prom, but then we have the social and cultural scene on which the prom was built. And then we have the American scene that gets narrated through the relationship between Vidalia and Rochester. So then we get to see that this is an American segregation problem that has impacts far beyond prom. Prom is just one. This anti-interracial prom is symptomatic of a larger culture that would rather us not be together but have us apart, because if you keep things apart, you don't have to actually know, right? You can always say, I don't know these people, right? And not knowing those people justifies all the mythologies, right? And so it's always interesting to me when people talk to me and they're like, wow, you from the south side of Chicago. I heard so much about that south side of Chicago. I said, what you hear? And usually it's something that is nothing to do with me, right? Had like something I go, that happened to two people? Oh, okay. It's like it would happen to everybody, right? And so I think sometimes what happens with segregation even, right, is there's an assumption that in segregation, folks live on that side of the town, and if that side of the town is different than the other side of the town, it's because the people made that side of the town different. And we know that that's not how the infrastructure of this world and society works, right? And so, to the point, last question, which is, when they have these segregated proms, just like in America, you got, good schools over here, bad schools over here, working schools and functioning schools over here, schools that are not functioning so well. So I'm wondering about when you have two different proms that are being funded by folks who have different sets of resources. What does that look like?
That was actually fascinating, because you saw most of the black students had to really work hard and fundraise for the prom. Prom was in the springtime, starting in the fall. And that's how much prom was so prominent in the minds of these children, because they had to start fundraising in the fall. And it felt a little bit unfair, because the school opted out, right? So they're privately held, so it's not illegal. That's the loophole, because the school couldn't hold segregated proms. So the white prom was mostly funded by the parents. So there's you see the economic disparity in the town as well, which said so much.
And exposes so much, right? In
Yes.
terms of how it is that jobs are distributed, how it is that wealth is often sometimes, generational or non-wealth, right? And how that impacts what you're able to do, but also what you're able to buy. And so I hope when folks see this prom image, right? Prom is in some ways representative of a larger set of divisions and differences. I want to turn to the audience now, because I see folks nodding and having questions, and they've seen the exhibition. And I think that we have about time for 2 to 3 questions. And so if there are pressing questions, there is someone going around with a microphone for you. But if you have a question and you want to raise your hand, we are excited about engaging you. Oh, there it is.
Hi, thank you for coming to speak today. I just wanted to say that your work has been a fantastic inspiration for me. I'm a photography student at RIT, working on my thesis about the area between Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Atlanta. So quite relevant. But I just had a question as far as the photography. Photography is referred to as this type of pointing, and this pointing can come from many places: political, artistic. And I was just curious with your images. They're obviously very beautiful. You have a wonderful eye for aesthetics, and there's also this very clear goal. It's not purely journalistic and objective. There is a goal with the work, and you have something to say. I'm just curious about the way in which you're infusing these aesthetics into these important and very pressing issues, and the way that you can balance that, and the way that the aesthetics hurt that, what you're trying to say, and the way that they also help.
That's interesting. So I don't think journalism is really important, and the ethics of journalism is really important, and I hold that as a high standard in my work, but I'm not a journalist. I feel like this is very interactive work. This is work that has a point of view. I'm not a fly on the wall. I'm not simply recording. I really do believe that photography has the power to tell stories, and my aesthetics are my aesthetics. I'm celebrating the color. I had this aesthetic. I like to think that the picture helps tell the essence of who I'm looking at and what I'm looking at. And to me, this wouldn't be the same if the pictures didn't have all the colors. So, it could somebody could criticize it that it's too highly stylized or aesthetic, but to me, I don't know. The pictures have to be aesthetic because that's what draws you in to care about the content.
And I wonder if there was so you did ask me about what some students said, and this is an interesting question because I did talk to a student artist who asked the question, for such a sad situation, how did you capture the beauty, particularly of the black images, right? And actually, I would actually say all the images, black, white, you were able to capture the essence of prom, the energy, the joy, right? Even as we know in the background, there were some folks who were kind of I can't go to the prom with the person I want to be with. Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit about portraiture, right? Because there's a way in which you created kind of portraiture, right? Portraits, right? Images, how did you do that, or what is the technique?
There's no manual. There's no secret answer. It's just portraits are what I've always been interested in portraiture. I've studied portraiture. I think that portraits have the ability to tell a story. Every detail in the portrait is important to me. That's why I also really like to photograph people in their homes, because your space tells so much about who you are, what you love, so everything in the frame matters. So, these kids are beautiful. So it's not like I can't take credit for that. Everyone, it was almost like you're cheating and that's why I do love photographing teenagers, because they're so visual and they're just at that cusp in life and becoming adults. And so I can't take credit for that. and also the dresses are very visual. So what I feared, and this is also why I started making the film, is that these pictures just look like pretty teenagers in prom dresses, and that's what. But that's also, I like that it has layers, right? So yes, they are pretty teenagers in prom dresses, and so much more.
So much more. Yes, question. We got a big hand, where's the person with the microphone? Person with the microphone. I don't see the person with the microphone. That's all right, I'm pretty loud. Okay, great. That might have been their cue to tell me to wrap up, but I do want to get this question. So no, we're good. We got about 5.
We have 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you for being here. It's really a pretty amazing exhibit. My name is Linda. I'm also a portrait photographer. I've always been fascinated by portraiture, but what I found really moving and interesting about the chosen images is that they, although pretty in their pretty outfits, you didn't necessarily choose those pretty typical prom shots, because several of the images that you used, they were not smiling. They were not happy. They didn't, I mean, I'm sure they were very happy at the event and having a great time, but the ones that you chose to show, the majority of them were real, were very real.
Well, that was the goal, to find a moment that feels like a real moment, not trying to smile, trying to pose, trying to be, it's like, that's the goal, is to feel like you're having a real moment where the person's coming through.
Have you had an opportunity to talk with the young people in the community that did post and get their perception of, or not perception, but their viewpoint of the images that you chose? And why did you choose this one? Because that was so much better.
Yes, actually, funny you should ask. Before Georgie's Min, the show was in Atlanta, and it was kind of a homecoming, and most of the kids that are in the pictures came to the show. And I took a picture down from the show of Lacey because she really didn't like the way she looked. She said it was okay that it was in the book, because I don't publish anything without letting somebody know that it's going to be in the book and get consent. But she, on second, in her mind, and I had to respect what she wanted, and the show was hung, and it was done. And every decision, as we know that every decision is mapped out before, and so to take a picture out at the very last minute was not a small thing. But her community, she was in Atlanta. She lives and works in Atlanta now. She just didn't want that picture of when she was senior in high school for her colleagues to see hanging.
That's really, really good. And one of the things that's interesting about the aesthetic for me is how important it is that on some level, the expression that folks are making actually speaks to us and tells us something that's beyond prom, which is, it's actually a critique of this kind of Victorian, and particularly because prom is historically so centered around particularly femininity, right? That's the center point, and a particular type of spectacular womanhood. Mm-hmm. And in some senses, especially for black subjects that you were capturing, they were refusing the kind of Victorian, like you might be wearing a tiara, but you're not gonna get a tiara expression from me, right? And part of what I like about that critique is because it offers a critique to prom itself, right? Because I do want y'all to know, young people, like, while prom is great, I did prom, some of us did prom, some of us didn't do prom, right? Prom is not everything. And prom is not the measurement of your beauty and your wealth and your greatness and all the things that you bring, right? And some of your pictures ain't gonna turn out so pretty, right? Or so handsome or whatever you wanna use. But to know that, right, who you are standing there is who you are standing there, and each of you have value. And so I think that that's what's really clear to me, is that regardless of what they did with the segregation of prom, these young people were like, we have value. Right? And I think that that's a really, really important thing that you capture.
Well, I think that that's just an important thing for me in photography. Like, taking a portrait is like, I value you. I want to look at you. I want you to look at me. That is why I love making portraits, because it really is like, I want to celebrate who you are.
Yeah. And you recognize, quite frankly, like, that some people are not as valued as others, right? And that's one of those things that brought you this. I think that's really, really beautiful. I think we got time for one more question. We got one in the middle. Oh, the mic is dead. Yeah, go ahead, Julius. Dr. Fleming, sorry.
So I'm Julius Fleming, I'm a professor at the University of Maryland College Park and MT Therapy. I saw the exhibit. I had two different experiences with your archive. One at the exhibit and one you sort of gave the preface to the conversation. At the exhibit, we end with, at least the way I navigated that experience, is the murderer, right? Justin's murder. Here you ended with Justin's daughter. So these kind of contrasting images of Black death and Black life. One thing I really appreciate is kind of your ethical commitment to refusing Black spectacle, right? Not just going in and getting a big story that's going to blow up in the New York Times, but actually lingering with these Black people, lingering with this community to see how their lives develop. I think the image of Justin's daughter captures that, right? From baby to now, I think adolescent. So what I want to ask you is like, how do we narrate this in a way that actually signals perhaps how we should deal with these moments of racial crisis? So on the one hand, we could end with the murderer, right, and kind of risk this spectacle of Black death. And one thing that concerned me with Michael Brown, with all the Black people who were killed, is the way the movie economy and cycle works. We're mourning it one day, and then we're off to the next big news cycle. But when you linger in the way that you do with this community, it sets up another paradigm. So I'd just be interested in you talk about those.
Well, thank you. I mean, that is why, you know, again, I can't tell you what the end of the story, you know, but what I can tell you is that I think what I'm learning as I'm, you know, getting to see Mia grow up, how her mom wants something, you know, the next generation, that every generation is supposed to be better than the last, right? So I'm watching her be the next generation. And that gives me hope. And that's also, you do see progress there. And that's what I'm interested in seeing. What moves forward, what stays, and I don't know, and patterns and how community is important. And, you know, so staying with one community, it's like there's so much there's so much to learn and to explore. So it just I'm never not interested in seeing how people's lives kind of unfold and grow.
We could take one more question, I think. Can we take one more question, Amy? Is that okay? Do I have time for one more? One little question. Okay. Is there anyone with a pressing question? I think we got one more. Actually, sir, 1 second. I'll take both of your questions and then we'll end with those. Okay, thank you.
I was wondering, do you feel that this should mobilize this whole room into taking action on doing some things to not just reverse those problems, but create something greater than that? I mean, we got a lot of senior people in here that might not have that time. I understand that the children are the ones that we should be feeding, but some way you need to unite these groups together and mobilize, because I'm quite sure you want to work and take that work that you're putting together on as a project. There's a lot of different angles, but most importantly, the work that it inspires is more important.
Okay, yeah. This.
Hi. So I was curious because the one photo of the man I was curious because there was the one photo of the man who murdered Justin and then sitting next to his stepdaughter. And you said there was some commentary around that you guys were going to exchange. I didn't hear that. And then the other question I'm considering is, what is your call to action for youth? Because my daughter's here today. She was born in 2006. And I'm like, honey, this is part of your lifetime, which is crazy to me. I did my dissertation in 1998 on racial socialization at NYU and had no idea that this was going on decades later.
So I'll answer that right away. So Basically, for me, and this is why I love to talk to students. This afternoon we talked to seniors, and for me, it's just really about the power of storytelling. And for instance, these students that were here, their school is closing, so it's like I told them, document, photograph, write, film, and now it's so easy to, with the camera phone, there's so many different tools and ways to communicate and get information out, which is also problematic too, which is a whole other conversation. But for me, it's about the power of storytelling and using your voice, and that's really important. And that's what I encourage students to do, because none of this would have even happened had a student not really, use their voice.
And I think, too, your points are actually really connected, but I think that one of the things I want to say is that I've seen a lot of audiences here. I've seen a lot of audiences at the last exhibit that we had, which was Joshua McFadden's exhibit that centered around Black Death. And what I find very interesting, and something that I do know that we need to change, this is across the nation, this is not just Rochester, I don't see enormous numbers of white children and teenagers in these spaces. I was in St. Louis doing a very similar exhibit, even the hip-hop exhibit in St. Louis. I'm like, this is an opportunity to have a conversation that they're not having in their schools, book bands, right? And so for me, it's like part of the work we do is bring someone with you who you know might benefit from this narrative. My child goes to a private school, which I tell everybody about this exhibition, and hopefully some folks have come, and they will if they haven't. But I think that it's really important to get the word out, not only about this work, but about the meaning of the work. The second thing I would say is artists, as the kids say, keep artisan. Keep doing the artwork. Keep making art, whatever your art is. If your art is an experiment in science that looks at health disparities amongst folks of color across the world, if it's photography, if it's painting, if it's fashion, if it's being a mechanic, whatever it is that you would like to do, right? Do it in community and with community. And do it in a way that does the kind of thing, and I think to Dr. Fleming's point, one of the things I think is so beautiful about your work is do it in a way that doesn't speak for communities, but speaks with communities, so that generations from now, we will look back and say, we'll both be gone, and we'll be like, Gillian Laub's work, that was important. And I want us to have those experiences as well. I want to thank you for allowing me to have conversation with you. I want to thank you all for your questions. And I really do want to say thank you for the Southern Rites exhibition. Yes.
Thank you.
And thank you to George Eastman for taking this opportunity. Yes. And thank you, students.